Hello, I'm Patison Delos Griffeth. Let me tell you the story of my life. I was born January 3, 1824 in Bar Orleans County, New York, between Rochester and Buffalo. I only lived here about 3 years. My parents are Judah Griffith and Maria Rockwell, both from New York. I was the oldest of 10 children. I was responsible for helping with the family chores. In 1827, my family moved to Amherst, Ohio in Lorain County. Our family built a cabin. Here is the 1830 U.S. Census. Notice some of my uncles also moved to Ohio with us. We owned a grove of maple trees from which we would extract maple sap. We would process the sap and turn it into syrup. We did this over an extremely hot fire, and it would go through the night for the process to be completed. Timber wolves were numerous and vicious and would come out at night to the fires. I would keep watch at night so that the wolves would not attack at the rear. I could see a row of wolves' eyes on the opposite side of the fire. My father was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Gideon Carter in Amherst in 1831, a year after the church was organized. He was ordained to a high priest by Joseph Smith Sr. 5 years later. Here is a photo of myself with my brothers. We moved to Warren County, Illinois near Nauvoo. We lived in Burrick and later in Hancock County. I was baptized in 1841 at the age of 17. When I was 20, I walked a great distance to attend the funeral of the prophet Joseph Smith. I also attended the meeting when Brigham Young looked like and sounded like Joseph. After the prophet's death, my church split up. I was the only one in my family that followed the new prophet Brigham Young. My parents and siblings chose to stay with the Josephites. In April 1846 I married Elizabeth Carson in Nauvoo. I was 22 and she was 23 years old. I needed a new suit, so we crossed the Mississippi River on the ice, but when we returned it was melting. We found a small pole of which we placed under our arms. Jumping from one piece of ice to another, we made our way back for the wedding. We suffered mob violence. On a rainy evening in the early summer, a mob attacked. I took my wife and 2 small children out into a field and hid them in a corn patch. The corn was not very tall, so they had to lie down to keep under cover. Here I left them while I went back to help the other men drive the mob out. For hours the wife and children lay there in the rain. In 1851, Elizabeth's family, the Carsons, decided to go west with the Saints, and she could not bear the thought of being left behind. She was 6 months pregnant. We joined the Harry Walton and Garden Grove Company. We drove 1 yoke of oxen and 1 of the milk cows. The cows were milked to provide milk and butter for the family. In order that Elizabeth may ride more comfortably, I made one of the wagons into a bed. This was done by stringing rope from one side of the wagon box to the other, crossing them over each other in the manner of an old rope bed. We camped on the banks of the Green River. We made camp for the night. After supper, we cleared the brush from a spot of ground and prepared to have a dance. I, being a violinist, furnished the music for dancing. Word was brought to me that Elizabeth was in labor, so I left the dance and hurried to her. Baby Louisa was born. The main company moved on without us briefly, but we had to drive hard to catch up. We arrived in Utah. We settled first in Big Cottonwood. Then began to pioneer Fairfield or Cedar Fort, where Elizabeth's Carson brothers had settled. We cleared the land, fenced in it, and built 2 granaries and a small cabin. In 1856 tragedy struck. Hostile Indians attacked and killed 2 Carson brothers. I was gone to another settlement at the time getting grain, otherwise I may have been killed. Poor Elizabeth watched the battle from the fort and saw George's white horse coming up the trail with his lifeless body thrown over the saddle. This is part of the Tintic War. The next year, another threat to our peace came when the Johnston's army came to Utah. The army camped near the Carson settlement known as Camp Floyd. John Carson had built a fine stagecoach in which housed General Johnston. After a brief time in Lehigh, our family was called on a settling mission by Brigham Young to settle Hyde Park in Cache Valley in 1860. The valley was large and most excellent for farming. 16 families were settled. My name is on this plaque honoring the settlers. Ezra T. Benson was our stake president. He called William Hyde as our bishop, and I was the first counselor. Eventually, 3 of my daughters married 3 of William's sons. 2 kids married into the Thurman family. My farm is just east of where the Logan Airport is today. We had some Indian problems here, so we formed a brigade in the Cache Military District. We were told to trust in God and keep our powder dry. You can see my name in the Cache District muster rolls. We were expected to be ready for service at any moment, day or night. Bishop Hyde appointed me as choir leader. I possessed the only music book in the ward at that time. In 1863, I married a second wife named Mary Gibson, a 17-year-old English immigrant. Elizabeth gave her consent first. We married at the endowment house. We had 9 children together: Sarah, Charles, William, Susan, Eleanor, Milton, Angel, Eva, and Ina. I had 8 children with Elizabeth: Phoebe, George, Louisa, Lavina, Mirinda, Ermina, Mary, and Patison. Elizabeth remained in Hyde Park most of her life. I took Sarah to live at a new settlement of Fairview, Idaho. This is just north of the Utah-Idaho border, just south of Preston. We hauled the lumber to build the first house there. They lived in a covered wagon until their one-room house was built. Here are the property allotments in Hyde Park. We lived next door to Robert Danes and 2 houses away from William Hyde and across the street from our meeting house. In 1872 I was called on a church mission by George Q. Cannon. The next year, I visited my parents in Iowa, but we were both sincere in our faith. There were 2 business ventures I worked on that failed. One was ZCMI. I had a financial loss there. I later put some big money to the railroad, but that left us heavily in debt. In the late 1880s, the persecution of the polygamists became so severe that we decided to move our family to Star Valley. Elizabeth stayed in Hyde Park, but Mary went to Wyoming, where we had more freedom. I would regularly travel back and forth between to take care of my families, including during the winter. Here is the 1892 homestead document that I signed for land in Auburn, Wyoming. I freighted supplies from Montpelier to Star Valley. One night it was very stormy. I found another freighter nearly frozen. I revived and cared for him. Others helped, and one man was very profane and drinking liquor. I rebuked him, saying, "Mister, I don't like your smoke any better than your language." I fiddled and played his violin and called for square dances all over Cache Valley. I loved singing and music. I was 5 feet 11 inches tall, with blue eyes and dark brown hair. I was stately, neat, particular and kind. I was tender-hearted and sympathetic. I didn't even scold, yet I was firm. I died on May 11, 1901. I had 17 children, 13 of whom were living at the time of my death. I am buried in the Grover Cemetery in Star Valley. It says, "Those who knew him most loved him most." I am Patison Delos Griffeth. I was a pioneer, carpenter, and talented musician. I loved my family and the gospel. Thank you for listening to my story.